Good day to you, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Facing the Nation. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us again this week. And it's a new month. It's the first Friday in the month of June, and it's the first day in the month of June. So I trust that all those things you didn't get to achieve in the month of May, I trust that you get to achieve them in the month of June, or at least come a little closer to the achievement, or I should say those achievements. Today on our program, at least on the first half of the program, we will be focusing on the decade for people of African descent. I know there's so much going on in the news that sometimes these things that are very important get swept underneath the carpet until a major event regarding the topic comes up. Then everybody focuses on it and then it dies down again. But this is very, very important, and it is my pleasure to be speaking with members of the coordinating council, actually the chairman of the coordinating council of that council regarding the decade of people of African descent. And of course, the chairman is Mr. Vincent Alexander, who's no stranger to this program, and he is accompanied by one of the members of the council, Miss Esther Gittens. Thank you to both of you for being here on Facing the Nation today.
You're welcome.
All right. As I said, this is not something that people are talking about, at least in the way that I feel we should be talking about it yet. So I'm happy to have both of you on here today. First of all, let's talk about the decade for people of African descent. And viewers, of course, it began in 2015, am I correct, sir? 2015
Yes.
to
Yes.
20, and a decade would take it to
24.
2024. Let's talk about that and the UN's declaration.
I think that is what's critical for us, first of all, to make it lucidly clear that this is a decade declared by the United Nations.
Okay.
And the declaration was done in 2013
Yes, it was.
by the UN.
Okay.
Yes.
And it's a decade dedicated, like other decades have been dedicated to other peoples, to people of African descent. The idea really of the decade is to, in a sense, look back at the way in which people of African descent have been disadvantaged,
Okay.
where there has been xenophobia, where there's been racism, and all of the effects on such people, and to see how we could start to redress those situations under the theme of recognition, justice, and development. Now,
Okay.
that theme tells a whole story.
Yes.
The areas of concern: recognition of people of African descent, justice for people of African descent, and development of people of African descent. So the United Nations, which means the world at large, the community, the world community, took a decision that there is need for such a decade. After there would have been a year for people of African descent a few years ago,
Which was
Yes.
2011.
2011,
Yes.
there was a year.
Alright.
And they've now decided there's a need for a decade, starting 2015, running up to 2024.
Mr. Alexander, even before you continue, and this is for both of you, and I'm happy that you reminded us that there was a year. Do you believe that as a people, and you know, we're going to stay home for a bit, in 2011, we would have seen some achievements, and really and truly, how has it contributed to what we are observing now, which is the decade?
In fact, the non-achievement of 2011, of anything in 2011, is what actually caused us to have this decade. Because, locally, all we got out of it was just a little song and dance.
Okay, understood.
There was some money given in 2011, but much of it was for some kind of cultural expressions. Did not really address
Song
the
and
state.
The
dance.
serious, like you said, the recognition and
African
justice
values.
and development.
Yes.
Understood. Good, go ahead, Mr. Alexander.
So here we are in 2018, trying to make an effort to make sure that we don't have a reoccurrence of what happened in 2011, and that we go way beyond. So what we have done in this instance, in the first instance, is attempt to set up an organization that will be responsible for the program. This all started, in a sense, in 2015.
15?
There was a launch of the decade. That launch was facilitated by
Several organizations headed by the Guyana Reparations Committee.
Okay.
there was that launch. And then in 2016, at the Coffee 250 Forum, the president, who had been at the previous launch, indicated some concern about the pace at which things were happening or not happening, and asked the community to be more proactive on the question. Coming out of that, Coffee 250 initiated a meeting of organizations.
Okay.
And those organizations morphed into what we called initially the core group. And that core group consisted of Afrocentric organizations, AGDA, PANAF, Coffee 250,
Rastafari
the Rastafari
community,
community, the Hebrew Church,
Israelite
the
Foundation,
Israelite Foundation, the African Orthodox Church, a
Bat
number.
Farmer.
Okay, so there are, because sometimes people get the sense that when we're talking, and viewers, I must remind you, and I think Mr. Alexander hinted to it earlier, not because you're promoting one ethnic group or race, however you describe it, means that you're anti any other ethnic race. Given that, saying that, there's a perception sometimes that most times when we talk about Afro-Guyanese, these Afro-Guyanese groups, most times people just think about AGDA and focus on AGDA and forget the others. So my point my question here is, are there enough of these groups indeed to help Guyana not only observe and be a part of and celebrate this decade of people of African descent?
There are two things about that. I agree that lots of people focus on AGDA, and they're probably not wrong in the sense that AGDA kind of sponsors the biggest activity every year, emancipation, and so they're profiled, and so obviously people will recognize. But there are other organizations that have been there. Some have predated AGDA. For example, if you take the PANAF, they predated AGDA in Guyana. And in fact, they do hold frequent activities. PANAF now, almost on a monthly basis, at the PANAF Gardens, would hold some forum where they seek to educate people on things pertaining to Pan-Africanism and the African Guyanese community. So yes, there are other organizations. I don't think one could.
And don't forget the Rastafari
One could,
community.
the Rastafari is very, very obvious.
Forever here in Guyana. We are very active because we celebrate a yearly calendar and we're out there all the time at various activities. But somehow people tend to detach Rastafari from the African movement, but PR.
Integral.
Okay.
So in this core group I talked about, it was made up of all of these organizations, and we worked for almost a year, meeting almost weekly.
Not almost. We met weekly, and sometimes we met as much as 3 times per week.
Right? To put together an organization and to do research on the state of the African Guyanese. Coming out of that, we came up with the organization, which is really an umbrella organization, called ITPADA-G. That is the International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly, Guyana.
And you add the G. Okay, yes.
Right? So it's an assembly of people of African descent in Guyana that has emerged out of the process that we'd have gone through. Now, as I said, the president, in a sense, gave a mandate in 2016 at the Coffee 250 Forum for us to do the work, and immediately became immersed in that work, and were able in 2017 at the Coffee 250 Forum to present a report on the work which we had done, and that report was some 150 something pages.
Yeah.
Wow,
right?
It's a lot of work.
Yes, and we went way back to the UN Declaration. We looked at historic facts about African Guyanese, and obviously if you're looking at historical facts of African Guyanese, you have to start at where they came from. So we started there from the moment of the place from which they came, enslavement, into what happened in Guyana, and came right through to present day in terms of the state of African Guyanese, and that would have helped us identify what the problems are.
Understood.
And so, having identified problems, the next stage would be solutions. Now, what we have done is to establish a secretariat for that organization. And that secretariat is what's going to kind of drive the work of the organization. And we have kind of outlined the organization's structure. You yourself said in your introduction that we are from the Coordinating Council.
Yes.
And that's quite correct. We have a Coordinating Council, but we also have a assembly.
Oh, so the assembly is different.
The Coordinating Council is like the executive
Is the exec
body or the
understood.
board of directors. The assembly is the coming together of the representatives of the groups.
Meaning all of the groups.
Right.
Yes.
And at this point in time, we are 31 in terms of the number of groups, but we wouldn't say wow. We are far from the number we want to have.
Really?
Yes.
Because our groups are of two sorts, geographic and interest. So we are looking forward to all African communities across the country having groups that have membership.
So this 30, you said 30?
31.
31. It's not it doesn't necessarily represent from all regions and
No,
We haven't captured everybody.
Yes, and we have a total
interesting.
of over 100 organizations registered with the Ministry of Culture, African organizations.
this is
What I needed to add
pleasant
to
surprise. Go ahead.
what you said, the president, when he threw out his challenge, he challenged us to come together and work in the areas of, he gave us the 5 E's, which is education, employment, economics, equality, and exploration. So we worked and developed our reports along the lines of those 5 E's. We did our researches in that area. We developed our report along that line, and we also have constructed 13 committees, no, 13 committees, and we've outlined our plan in projects, programs, and policies, and each of those committees have 4 subcommittees, because projects has the 5 E's, but we pull them into 4 because we said we would put expiation and equality as one. So we have 4 subcommittees in 2 of the committees, which is programs and policies. But in projects, we came up with something called special projects, because when we studied the United Nations Declaration, we recognized that the 5 E's might not cover all the areas that need to be covered. So we had something we called other that we were working with, the 5 E's and other. So we classify that as special projects when we form the committees.
So that tells you a bit about the structure of the organization.
A lot,
because
actually.
what we now have would be the assembly, which is the ultimate decision-making body, and the coordinating council, which is the body that's there giving leadership in between meetings of the assembly, the secretariat, which is the day-to-day operations. Then we have these subcommittees, which are in clusters. The clusters would be policy, programs, and projects. Yes, but under each of those, we then have economics, employment, equality, and so those are the areas in which we're working to develop our program for the decade.
Just for clarity, and really, Julie, you did made it clear, and I'm happy that Ms. Gittens talked about the 5 E's, meaning on one of them being employment. You know, the topic of employment, or unfortunately, unemployment in Guyana is always a big issue. And you talking about the secretariat now, just so that the viewers can really understand where you're going. That too will also provide jobs for people.
The secretariat is not intended to provide jobs.
No. Oh.
I don't know what you mean by that.
It will, because we have to employ 13. We have to have staff.
It can't be on an ongoing scale.
The secretariat will be staffed.
Yes.
But we shouldn't see staffing the secretariat as fulfilling the objective of providing jobs.
Okay.
Staffing the secretariat is intended for us to get the kind of manpower in place that can help to execute the program.
Yes.
Right? So in that sense, the secretariat, yes, there will be some jobs, but that's not the objective of the secretariat.
All right.
However, the work of the organization is aimed at the issue of employment, because it is recognized that one of the issues we face historically as people of African descent is employment. And it's a very critical issue. It's multidimensional. We know, for example, after enslavement was abolished, that African Guyanese, in a sense, were forced off of their estates by
Yes.
virtue of bringing in other labor that was cheaper at the time. So the question of employment arose there. We know that in the villages, when the African Guyanese attempted to be involved in agriculture, the villages were flooded, and some of the effects of those floods, and in fact some of the flooding continued probably on to today.
Up to today, not
On to
probably.
today.
We know for sure up
Right?
to today because Buxton still experiences that flooding and a
the
few
BV
other
has
places.
the BV and other
Yes,
places. So
not only were we, because even though we sought to be self-sufficient, we planted, we farmed, the colonizers at the time, or the remnants that was left here, still wouldn't buy from us. They wouldn't
Okay.
buy our provisions. We had to sell to the Portuguese, who they would then really buy from. So we had to sell it very cheap.
Okay, so right, you still
Employment.
And we weren't
Okay.
given licenses in our own villages to have shops too.
right, there were privileged groups that were given certain things, and therefore African Guyanese and people of African descent continue to be disadvantaged by a system that was set up against them, not in their favor, not to give them equal opportunities. And in fact, that's what we now have to
To
address,
redress.
because these things have become institutionalized.
Yes.
In ways in which we have to create new institutions, and that's why we
just to give people of African descent
Yes,
opportunities.
in
equal
fact,
opportunities. That's why we
our-
talk, for example, about policies, because we
Yes.
need in the country the kind of policies that would not discriminate against anyone, but would seek at the same time to redress the discrimination
That has been,
that's
Yes.
suffered by African
Because,
Guyanese.
for instance, right locally, we found 15 discriminatory acts that were implemented by the Guyana government against Africans. So we are not in this social, political, and economic position by chance or because we're lazy or we don't strive. It's because of systems that were put
In
in
place,
and
just to
implemented in
disadvantage.
place to make sure that we remain in this substandard position.
Okay, great, understood. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, of course, this is a discussion with members of the, well, basically we're focusing on the decade for people of African descent. You already heard a lot from Mr. Vincent Alexander regarding what he has coined, the entire committee and assembly. I padded G, and the G, stands for Guyana. You add Guyana onto every other thing. I read here, Mr. Alexander, and of course this was written by you. The Assembly has already received over a dozen project proposals from African groups. We're already talking the groups. How much about those proposals you can
All
possibly
right,
talk about?
though we were in the preparatory stage last year, we recognized a window of opportunity that was available. And one of the things in Guyana is that there are opportunities, and people sometimes don't even know the opportunities exist. And there isn't sufficient outreach to communities to share information on these opportunities. So we became aware of opportunities through basic needs, which has been around quite a while. In a sense, basic needs is a successor of the CIMAP project. And it's been around quite a while, but the information about it has not really necessarily been shared with all peoples, and might be one of the areas in which African Guyanese were again disadvantaged. So we heard of the
That's
opportunity,
recurring theme.
and we immediately sought to find out from basic needs what is it that they do and they provide for. And we found out that they provide funding for community-oriented projects that will impact community development. We then said to our organizations immediately, do you have projects? And we found that there were about 20 projects lying around that had been conceptualized, but there was no funding and a way forward for those projects. So we took them immediately to basic needs and says, look, tell us which of these projects meet your criteria. And they looked at them, and so far they've classified 3 of them as meeting the criteria and have in fact put them in the pipeline for funding. Those 3 projects are going to impact community. Probably Esther could say
Yeah,
a
I was
bit
coming
more.
to right. How will it trickle down to you and I? How we will benefit people who are not necessarily directly involved. How can they benefit?
Well, these projects are based in the community and for the community, and actually the ideas for these projects came out of the community, because during our research we found in almost every area there was needs for certain development. For instance, there is one of the projects is a garment project. Yes, a
Factory,
garment. Not we're training to construct garments, and well, BNTF asked that upholstery and tailoring be added because it was basically dressmaking. And it was called Promoting African Culture Through Fashion and Style. But they asked that we add upholstery and tailoring to it. What we found out, there was a lot of teenage mothers and young adults too, who were, because it's being school dropout or whatever, were not equipped to provide a daily living and even to take care of their children in a proper way. So, and when we asked them, if you got a chance to do something, what would you like to do? And it was common in almost every village that they thought sewing was a way that they could be at home with their children and still provide a means of living. So that is how we came up with that idea. The other vocational training, which is a mechanical project. Well, we know we got a lot of youths all over, linemen at the corners, on the bus parks and so on, idle doing nothing. And so there's this brother with a workshop, and from time to time he would go and get some of these same youths to come and be involved in what he's doing. He might give them something small, but he can't afford the demand. He needs more resources to make the program more meaningful. So that is how we came up with that idea too. And of course the other project, which is a fishing project, we recognize that the art of fishing is going away from our villages. We have a lot of fishermen, but they don't have resources to own their own boats and so on. So one sister, who is actually the only woman, and she's African too, in the fishing industry, Miss Alison Butters Grant, she has this, you know her, and she's known.
I think Guyana knows her because some people are even calling her a trailblazer because, you know, what she's doing is quite unique and, you know, really benefiting us. And I guess this is where what we were talking about early comes in, employment. That is how employment will be provided.
And bearing in mind too, the president repeats every chance he gets, the government can't provide jobs for everybody.
Very true.
Very true.
Mr. Alexander, I don't know if we've missed anything. Again, as I did say, this is not a group, a council, or an assembly that we hear about every day. So obviously I may have missed things, and if I
I tell you what, in terms of our organization, we are going to be involved in research because we find that research is a critical part of the work we have to do to inform what we do and to educate our people about who we are. And so research is going to be a critical part of what we do. And so in our secretariat, we're going to locate research as one of our activities. We are going to have people involved in projects, people who can educate others about how to develop project proposals and how to implement projects. So our secretariat will be focusing on that as well. So two main areas of focus of the secretariat, which really will be providing support to the groups out there to be able to become proactive, structured groups that can sustain their engagement infinitely. So the focus is not on Part G. Part G is just a facilitator of what we hope will happen, and because the decade will come to an end. But the idea is that when the decade would have come to an end, we would have been able through policy to redress the issues, and through programs and projects to provide opportunities for people so that they could be justice for them, recognition, and critically, there could be development.
And not fall back into, well, some people would want to say backslide into, well, to some extent, the state that we're currently in now. But
the idea is to take us out of that state and to be able
permanently
to sustain
permanently
that movement.
All right. Are you seeing much challenges at this point? Again, because it's sitting here talking, but it is indeed a lot of work and it takes great effort. Are you at this point seeing challenges?
Of course there are challenges. The first challenge, and I think the major challenge that one would be faced with, is how do you bring together people who are not homogeneous? African Guyanese are homogeneous in sight, but we are of different religions, we different social groups, and so people have different ideas, different perspectives, and all of that. And so the challenge is, this is a decade for people of African descent, not for one group not for one sector, but for all people. And so the major challenge, in a sense, is how do you bring all of these people together on one agenda? And so in a sense, we have to be able to deal with unity in the face of diversity, because there is diversity.
Diversity, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so we have to find a way in which we can work together, a way in which we can collectively confront our commonalities and not allow our differences to set us apart.
Mm-hmm.
That is the challenge. And funny enough, that's the challenge for Guyana.
Yes,
yes,
so
definitely.
in a sense, as we overcome that challenge among ourselves, we'll be better poised to deal with the Guyanese challenge
True.
of unity in diversity.
I know, again, we're talking about, and again, Ipadaji, adding a G to it as in Guyana. Is there any way that you may probably use examples? Because, again, this is the UN, coming back to where we started, the
Yes.
UN's decade. Is there any way that, advice or even patterns can be taken from other countries? Is it necessary?
Certainly. It's a UN decade for peoples of African descent, so it's not for Guyana.
Alone.
And so one would expect that in the decade, you would also have cooperation and collaboration across the diaspora and into Africa.
Okay.
And in fact, so far one of the organizations held a conference called the ITPAD Summit. ITPAD Summit. And that summit, in fact, was aimed at bringing to Guyana people from the diaspora and people from Africa to establish collaboration and cooperation in the pursuit of recognition, justice, and development for peoples of African descent. And they identified specific areas of cooperation. They want to set up transnational relations and transnational institutes that can work on these issues as well. So it's not just an isolated Guyana something. It's a Caribbean. In fact, at that conference, Professor Shepard, in her comment, I think it was her or someone else in the comment, said what we were doing in Guyana was in fact a best practice that other countries should be looking to follow.
And she talked about look to other countries, for example. I think a lot of other countries are looking to us for an example right now, because the fact is that Guyana has taken a leadership role in the implementation of this international decade, because so far we're the only country that the government has made a call for us to actually get going and supported us financially too. So
the government has responded, because in the national budget, the government has provided the sum of 68 million for the work in the year 2018, and the idea is that they would continue to provide. Now, much of that money this year will be done for the establishment of the Secretariat and getting the work going. Beyond that, we're going to be looking at the idea of projects and programs, and we're going to be having people coming to the government with the idea of policies. And we already have some, for example, one idea of policy, which is critical, is in the area of the curriculum, the school curriculum. We are already advocating that Guyanese history must be taught. And when Guyanese history is taught in school, then the true role of African Guyanese in the development of Guyana should be taught, as well as the true role of all Guyanese. And that should help for an appreciation of who we are as Guyanese, who we are as disparate groups of Guyanese, and the mutual respect across the spectrum for the different groups of Guyanese. So that whilst we are talking about decades for people of African descent, the impact